Welcome to Lift Your Legacy. My name is Jacob Rupp, father, husband, and rabbi. And each week we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you unlock your inner potential and create change that will impact the future. Thank you for listening, and let's get to it. Do you ever wonder how you actually start changing the world, like really going big and accomplishing things on an international level? Okay, today is your episode because we have Lori Palatnik, who started off building a large institution with her husband, Jewish institution in Canada, went around as a speaker and a lecturer, but then recently has been building this unbelievable program called the JWRP, the Jewish Women's Renaissance Project, which brings thousands and thousands and thousands of people to Israel and is literally and fundamentally changing the face of Jewry around the world. So today we're going to talk about how she got into that, some practical tips, and something that I'm fascinated by, why she's focusing on and building up and how she sees women as the fundamental pillars of change in the home and why she's really focusing on them. So with no further ado, Lori Palatnik. You've had a very dynamic career and have worked in a bunch of different areas. Can you tell me a little bit about how you've sort of identified the next steps throughout your career and how you've jumped into that?
Well, I definitely, nothing was really planned out. My husband always says that his favorite joke is, how do you make God laugh? Tell him your plans. So I never really thought like, oh, this will lead to this, lead to this, lead to this. We've been working in Jewish communal work for the last 30 years. And I started off just as like a young rabbi's wife, teaching around my dining room table and doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And things just started to happen. And I always say, if God opens a door, I'm going to walk through. I don't know what's going to happen when I walk through, but if he opens a door, I'm walking through. So I've had different opportunities. I started, I started off as sort of like a young community rebbitzin, and I was having children. This was in Toronto, and I had 5 children there. And we were building a community. We started something called the Village Shul, which is an outreach synagogue that was really very eclectic and really something that, we all grew up in after school Hebrew schools and synagogues that we hated. And we decided to make something that people would love. And we started off with 5 families, and they were just fantastic families, and we're all idealistic, and we all kind of grew up together. And it ended up being like a very successful thing. And now it's a 14,000 square foot center in Toronto's Forest Hill. And hundreds of families, probably thousands of families have been impacted. And that was something that really started in our living room with 5 families. So that was really working in terms of communal work. And every year I would put on a fundraiser, like we would do an auction or we would do something. Now they do a golf tournament, I think. And I was always like teaching a little bit one-on-one. And then I started teaching some classes. But again, it was in between having children. And then I started writing books because my background actually is in advertising. I always say I'm still in advertising. I just have a better product. So my background is in communications, and I work for Leo Burnett, an ad agency, and I worked in radio in Southwestern Ontario in Canada. And so I started, I was frustrated because we'd have all these guests for Shabbat, and I would say to my husband, they were asking for a book, like, oh, this is nice. Do you have a book you could recommend where I could start doing this? So I started researching, and I didn't really see any books I liked. So my husband said, you're a writer. So, because that's what I did in advertising. I was a copywriter. So write a book. So I started writing books. And so because I started writing books and I was teaching, so then I got offers to teach in other cities. And then it kind of like took off because there's a lot of rabbis out there on the circuit, on the speaking circuit, but there's not a lot of women. And really, a community lives and dies by where the women are at. So there started to be an understanding and a demand for women as role models. And I started getting booked. So then, after the Village Shul took off and I started becoming a little bit of a personality, so we decided to move, the Village Shul became a success. So we gave it to another rabbi to run because we're not the maintainer types. We're kind of like start something from nothing types. So a little bit adventurous. So then we moved to the States. My husband's from Chicago originally. And so I got my kids all dual citizenship and we moved to the States. And then of course, moving to the States is kind of like the big show and things really took off for what I was doing. And I became like sort of an international speaker. And then I had a video blog that became very popular because the internet started taking off. And so one thing led to another. And every year I would always go to Israel every year. I'm going to Israel, who wants to go with me? And I would plan an itinerary and people would come. And I really saw that going to Israel was very transformational for people, but it wasn't strategic or a thought out idea. It was kind of like, I'm going to Israel, who wants to go with me? And I would get somebody to do like the book, like the guides and the buses and the hotels and stuff. And I saw that when we were in Toronto, one year we brought 50 women from the community. And that really was the tipping point for the community. The women came back and things just took off. So
what do you mean by things took off?
That means that a small little thing became a very big thing, because these women, like the three most important decisions a family will ever make are primarily in the hands of women. Where we live. Are you married, Rabbi?
I am, yes.
Yeah, so if you want to move to another city and your wife doesn't want to move, are you moving?
No.
No, you're not moving. So where we live, where our kids go to school, I always tell the women, like, the school you pick for your children is not who you will be, it's who your grandchildren will be. Wow. The third decision is really who we socialize with, who we hang out with. Who you hang out with is who you become. Those decisions are primarily in the hands of women. So if we can, she is the most important person in the family that's making the most important decisions that will affect the family now and for generations. And yet she was the most underserved in the community. There's all these things for youth and for young professionals but there was nothing for the mother. And the husband had a sort of a system also in terms of communal work that, in terms of boards. And you see that most nonprofits are headed by men. And a man sort of had a certain role in the community, but for the woman, they really very, very much underserved. So in 2008, I gathered 7 other women together. There was 8 of us, and we went away to Utah to talk about how because as I was traveling around, I saw communities internationally were going down. So I would go to a community, then a couple of years later I would go and I would see it's going in the wrong direction. And I would get like crazy job offers because there's not a lot of women in leadership roles in these communities. So I would come home and say to my husband, you want to be the chief rabbi of Costa Rica? Comes with maids. And my husband's like, I don't speak Spanish. I go, Jacob, it comes with maids. So obviously I'm not moving to Costa Rica, and I'm not moving to Atlanta, and I'm not moving to Istanbul. So what am I going to do to help these communities? So I gathered these women together. They were 8 of us from the Washington, D.C. area, which is where I live now. And I said to them, that Jewish women were at the forefront of social change with the feminist movement of the 1970s. I said, so I believe that Jewish women could be at the forefront of another movement of social change. Let's create something. So we really went through a process to come to a common mission, vision, and purpose. And we're all very different. Half were observant, half were not. Half were very, very left Democrat, half were very, very right Republican. One was not married at the time. One was married with no kids. One had little kids. One had teenagers. I wanted everybody's voice. And we found the congruence of our values, and we established the Jewish Women's Renaissance Project. And then we brainstormed on which ideas would bring this mission to fruition. And we came up with like really countless ideas, and we advocated for the ideas that we believed in. And 3 ideas rose to the top. This was over a 3.5-day period. And this idea now that we established the Jewish Women's Renaissance Project, I'm the founding director. So the 3 ideas rose to the top, and we all sort of broke up into groups to see if anything got traction. So these trips to Israel, this birthright for mothers, so to speak, took off like a rocket. This one, I have never been involved in anything in 3 decades of Jewish communal work that captured everybody's imagination from the beginning. It literally took off. And everybody said, you're right, it's the mother. Like, duh, like it's the mother, it's the mother. So we, the first year, we brought 300 women from 3 groups of 100 from Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And it was a 10-day trip back then. And it's been refined over the years. And then we brought 600, then we brought 900. Then Israel's Ministry of Diaspora Affairs came to us and said, who are you guys? So we heard about you. What are you doing? And so I explained to them what we're doing, and I passionately, pitched to them to become partners. And they said, fine, double your numbers, get into Eastern Europe, and we'll help back you. So I flew to Moscow, and I flew to St. Petersburg, and I flew to Germany, and I was in Turkey and Greece and all these different, and Hungary. And we doubled our numbers. We got into Eastern Europe. And that created a partnership with the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. So we have now brought 11,000 women from 26 different countries.
That's amazing. So let's delve into two separate areas that popped out as you were speaking. The first thing that you pointed out multiple times was that in the beginning part of your life, you were raising children. So was this something for those of us I have little kids, and a lot of the families that are out and working have little kids, is this something that you could have accomplished with the little kids? Or do you advocate that a person sort of develops, like really spends time focusing in on the family? And again, this could be both for women and for men. This is one stage of our life. We're in the building stage. And the next stage is I'm going to try to catapult out, and I'm going to try to really have this impact on the broader community. Or is this something that, had JWRP sort of dropped in your lap, so to speak, when you were raising kids, that you would have jumped on?
So I was a stay-at-home mom for the first 13 years of our marriage. And it was actually a stretch for me to do that because it's really not my personality, but I was very, very important years. I don't regret at all having those years. I could never do what I'm doing on the scale that I'm doing it back then when I had little kids. There's no way. My youngest is now 18 years old. Okay. I'm at a completely different stage of life. We have one who's married, one who's about to get married in a few days. And there was no way I could have done this. So, and also not just practically, but just in terms of my own maturity and my own confidence and the skills and the sense of urgency that built, because the Jewish people are not going the world is not going in a good direction. So I could never have done it. So, but what did I do? Because I have a good friend, she lives in Seattle now. And when I say to her, like I was a stay-at-home, when she hears me say I was a stay-at-home mom for the first 13 years, she was my next door neighbor. She was my next door neighbor. And she just laughs. Yeah, Lori, right. Well, I was a stay-at-home mom, but I was putting on the annual fundraiser and I was teaching and I was doing this, but I really was a stay-at-home mom. I did not, my kids were not in daycare. My kids were not in, no one was raising my kids except for me. But at night, when they're asleep, so I was teaching and I would do the fundraiser, like I was gaining experience. And once a year I would go to Israel. So my husband would cover the kids. So that was sort of the seeds of everything. So I definitely, some people say like, Lori, am I supposed to be you? And I'm like, don't be me. First of all, it's exhausting. I said, don't be me, be you, be you. Everybody is given God gives people different talents and skills. And I have to tell you, when I started the JWRP, I remember my friend Barry Feld, she's a representative in Cleveland. And I remember where I was standing when we had this conversation. I'm on my front porch. I just got back from Utah where we had planned this. And Barry calls up, hey, what's going on? And I told her, we have this idea. And she gave me the best advice ever. She said, Lori, just don't get in God's way. Because what happens is we get in God's way. God gives us talents and skills and opportunities, and we have fears and anxieties and baggage, and we get in God's way. Like God gives us an opportunity, and we think it's up to us. If it was up to us, good luck. Like we are limited, but God is unlimited. It's unbelievable. We now have a $10 million annual budget. I'm responsible for raising the money. And I'm not a fundraiser. I'm an educator. I'm actually a very gifted educator. I believe that it's a God-given talent that I have, speaking is definitely something, the more you do it, the better you become. But I am not a fundraiser. And believe me, even though the first 3 letters of fundraising are fun, it's not so much fun. And it's a tremendous amount of pressure. It's a constant pressure. And it's not something that I was running to do, that's for sure. It's something that was very, very challenging for me, and it always is. And it's only increasing. But without the money, there's no way to do this, because it's a free trip, not including airfare. And we do it in partnership with local organizations. And for every woman, basically it costs $3,100 plus airfare to make it happen. And she does the airfare, and the organization puts in $450 or $550 now. And I have to raise the rest. So I'm not alone. I do have, a big team now that helps me. But in the end, I'm responsible. And so it's a lot of pressure. But I have to tell you, what happens is when you're in leadership position, God gives you a certain amount of success in a certain area, and you could hang out there. I could have hung out being Lori Palatnik, traveling around, speaking nicey nice. Or when God gave me this opportunity to do something bigger, so I stepped up. And I did. And believe me, if in Utah, if they would have said in a few years, you're going to have to raise millions of dollars a year, I would have said, I'm out. But God was like, okay. I remember my first budget I had to raise. How much did I have to raise the first year? I think it was $350,000. And I'm thinking, where am I going to find $350,000? And somehow I was able to raise it. And then the budget got bigger and bigger every year, and the success got bigger and bigger, and the impact and the opportunity got bigger and bigger. We now have a waiting list of countries and cities, and if we only had the funds, what could happen? So it's really, it's a very exciting what's going on. But you see that in leadership, even though God makes the test higher of what he expects of you, you become hopefully a greater person along the way. So it shouldn't feel harder.
How have you gotten out of God's way? That's such a tremendous concept that I have to think about. But if you were going to give advice about getting out of God's way, I mean, obviously there's a very challenging skill set in learning how to kind of quiet down all of your fears and kind of step out into the unknown. But what did you do in order to, did you find was that just naturally, was it the mission was so driving for you, or like, what was that process like?
I actually looked for help in this area, and I started studying something called the psychology of mind. And it's the principles of it are basically, it's not your situation that creates your emotional reality, it's your thoughts. It's not your situation, it's your thoughts. Because you could have a situation and somebody has, very optimistic thoughts and somebody has very anxious thoughts. It's the same situation. So they're just thoughts. So I learned that instead of replacing the thoughts with, when you have anxious, worry, fear thoughts or regret and guilt, like you have, basically people are either living in the past or the present or the future. No one's ever present. The past, that's where guilt and blame and regret live. And fear, worry, and anxiety live in the future. So most people are primarily one or the other. I am very much a future person. I have moments where I regret, like, why did we sell the house then? If we would have sold the house later, we would have made more money. So I have moments like that. But mostly where I live is in the future, which none of it makes any sense, because the past is over and the future hasn't happened yet. And once you realize that those things are illusory, those things are just like, the future hasn't happened and the past is over, and that's where I'm living. The only reality is now. So if you can focus on being present and saying God takes care of the future and just doing your best in the present, because you don't know what the future is going to be. All you can do is your best. When I'm not doing my best, that's not good, because sometimes I do. I hide behind my worries and my fears and my anxiety. But if I can clear my head, instead of replacing the thoughts, you clear the thoughts. Because really, you have inner wisdom. You really know what to do. If think about something right now, Rabbi, that you're concerned and worried about. You got it?
Yes.
Okay. If somebody would come to you with the same situation, but it's their life, and they would say, Rabbi, this is what's going on, I bet you would have great wisdom for them. Great
100%,
advice.
100%.
Okay. So, but when it's ourselves, we get caught up in it. All right. So if you can clear the decks, and even imagine if somebody came to me, what would I tell them? I think you would have very, very good advice for them. So you already have, the Almighty has already given you all the answers right inside your neshama and your GPS, your God positioning system, your soul. So you already know which way to turn. You're just not listening because there's so much noise going on in your head. We have very, very busy minds, and we have all these voices in our heads. And what if this is, and I'm going to worry, and what do they think? And all the things that go in our heads. And we can't hear the answer and the clarity. But if you just clear your head, So according to the studies, the number one place to get that eureka moment, that I got it, the number one place, do you know where it is?
No, I do not.
In the shower.
Shocking.
In the shower. Why? Because your mind is just, you're not thinking. It's a mindless thing that you're doing. And that's where people get the answers. The second place is ironing. So that's why I tell the women that your housekeeper is a lot happier than you are, because she's got all this mindless work that she's doing and she's getting the answers. So the idea is just not to overthink, because what's going on is you're overthinking already, not to think more, but to basically let the thoughts go, wait for, it's called the 3 C's, calm, clear, and connected. When you're calm, clear, and connected, in the Torah concept is called Yeshuva Dat, which means like a settled mind. When you're calm, clear, and connected, now think, now make a choice, now make a decision, now have a significant conversation, now make a significant purchase, now click send on the email. But when you're not in those 3 C's, when you're freaking out, don't make a decision. Don't have a significant conversation. When you're angry and worried and freaking out, like, don't do anything. Just wait, let it go. Sometimes you sleep on it. Sometimes you go for a run. Sometimes you meditate. Sometimes you can do yoga. Sometimes you go for a swim. Sometimes it's just a matter of time where you just let it go and clarity will come.
If you were going to speak to the mass majority of Jewish women, which I know encompasses so many millions of people and in so many different lifestyles, if you were going to pick like one lesson that, it's going to be a 3-part question, what is the lesson that women as a whole need to really internalize? Then how do husbands empower, to bring out the ultimate, what is the husband's job in bringing out, the best version of the Jewish woman? And then what is the father, mother's job in terms of bringing that out with the children? So it's kind of a one theme, but maybe through 3 different lenses. What would you say about that? Well,
the number one thing I think that the women get on the trips is a relationship with God. This is something that there was a study done years ago about Newsweek magazine. It was a cover story on prayer. It was called Talking to God. So of course I bought it. And I remember it was a picture of the earth from space with little angel wings on it. And they did a study about prayer. Like, do people pray? How often do they pray? Do they think God ever answered their prayers? And they broke it down based on religion, socioeconomic groups, genders. And the reporters said that it was surprising to them of all
Jews are 0.
Right? Well, it wasn't 0, but of all the people surveyed, the people who had the most, who had the biggest problem with God were the Jewish people. So we're God's chosen people, and we're the ones who are the most uncomfortable with God. Why? Because deep down, and sometimes it's deep, we know we have a heavy relationship with the Almighty, and we don't want to go there. So this is something that on the trip that people start to get comfortable with and realize that God runs the world. God runs the world. And if God runs the world, first of all, when I realized, it wasn't until my 20s that I realized this, because I was raised not very observant. And when I realized that God ran the world, I was so relieved that I didn't have to run it anymore. Like, so relieved. So
was that a breakthrough moment for, what was that? Like it was like a snap, or you were just like slowly?
No, it was a combination of slowly. And then there was for sure a snap.
Very Jewish answer.
Yeah. And I really, I remember the first time I kept Shabbat, because the whole idea of Shabbos is that you stop creating to recognize there's a creator. So when I remember the first Shabbat I ever kept, I remember when it was over, I remember thinking the world kept turning without me, because I'm definitely one of those people that unless I do it, it's not going to get done. And that there's a sense of control and a sense of, so there's a tremendous pressure. So when you realize that God runs the world and he's given you all the tools that you need and all the people that you need and all the wisdom that you need, that the Torah is not dusty Bible stories, men in robes walking through sand dunes. The Torah is filled with wisdom. It's a God put us in this world and gave us an instruction manual. But what happens when you don't read the instructions, you mess up. So read the instructions. But when we read the instructions growing up, I went to Sunday school, after school, Hebrew school, which in Toronto we call Jew jail. So there was nothing relevant or inspiring about it. It was just dreidel, and they tried to kill us. We won, let's eat. And that's the way being Jewish was. And my brother's bar mitzvahs were more bar than mitzvah. And that's how most Jews grow up. So it was really a revelation to me in my early 20s when I took a second look at what's in the Torah and started reading it and questioning and learning and grappling and still doing that. And this wisdom that was like filled with wisdom, like how to choose the right person to marry, how to have a great marriage, how to raise great kids, how to realize your potential, how to be successful in business. It's all in there, but we're the people of the book and we didn't read the book. I always say we all saw the movie, but we didn't read the book. And the book is always better than the movie. So this was really a process for me. So for women, I think women, for men, for everyone, realizing that God, being the chosen people does not mean we're better. Doesn't say we're better. We're chosen for a responsibility. We really are supposed to be a light unto the nations. We really are supposed to be an example to the other nations. And we're not doing a good job. We're a very dim light. So know that there is a God. You're not alone. God gave you God loves you. He loves you more than your kids love you. More than you love your kids. He loves you more than your parents ever loved you. And he gave you a guidebook to help you to get the most pleasure out of life. And even your challenges are there for a reason. Your challenges are there also because he loves you and he wants you to realize your potential. And he's trying to squeeze the potential out of you. And that reframes everything. Everything is different when you realize that you framed it, that there is a plan, that there's no accidents, that things don't happen, that there's no luck or coincidence, that everything happens for a reason, that the Almighty is always talking to us. And then you just start having a relationship. And this relationship is a game changer.
What does that relationship look like for the individual? How does a person, is it just through Torah study, or how does a person start to really, I guess, for women, if it's different, or there's some kind of a, distinction. And I love the idea that we're able to bring, thanks to the work that you're doing and other important women in the world, bringing sort of a feminine view of Torah. I think it's greatly needed. So how does a woman or a person develop that sense of a relationship with God?
Okay. So first of all, how would you develop any relationship?
Hang out with the person and get to know them.
Get to know them. The more you know him, the more you know him, the more you love him. The more you see his hand in your life, the more relationship. If you never talk to someone, if you said, oh, that person's my best friend, we haven't talked in 14 years, you don't have much of a relationship. I'm sorry. So just start to talk to God. Talk to God. We talk about prayer on the trips and understanding that prayer is talking to God, any language, anytime, anywhere, and start to have a relate. You can't have a relate, and you start to see that God's talking back. He's not talking back through a voice in the clouds. He's not talking back through on a mountaintop, but everything that happens in our life, God is talking back. And now you start having a relationship. And also when you ask God to help you, you know you're not alone and anything is possible. And when you start seeing God answer your prayers, and we always say God answers every prayer. Sometimes he says yes, and sometimes he says no. So if he says no, because God can only give it to you if it's good for you. So how do I make this good for me? Why would the answer be no? And the Hebrew word for prayer is lahitpalel, which means to self-examine, to self-judge. So now you start having a relationship. And that's just like any relationship. A relationship there's a responsibility to a relationship. There's a commitment to a relationship. There's a give and take. There is definitely a constant communication.
And how did Jewish husbands go to most empower their wives?
So first of all, we now have a men's trip. Our trips are called Momentum. And when it's the women, we emphasize the mom of Momentum. And when it's the men, it's the men of Momentum. Because from the beginning, the women kept saying, my husband has to hear this. My husband has to see this. So now we have husbands trips, the Momentum trip for men. And it's incredible. First of all, the husbands are all warmed up and the women are pushing them out the door. Go to Israel, learn some wisdom, and come back and let's be on the same page. And it's really our data shows it's having a huge impact on the home, the values of the home, their marriages, strengthening their marriages, making decisions for their children in a very positive way. So because we give them, again, wisdom about their marriage and about parenting, and they engage with Israel. They're committed. They become committed to. Over half the people have never even been to Israel. And now suddenly Israel, they start standing up for Israel, and they're empowered to be able to stand up for Israel and all the great things that happen with it. So for the men, we talk about what a husband's job is. I have a class I only appear strategically on the men's trip, and I have a talk that I give them that's called What Your Wives Want You to Know. So we talk about marriage and his role in marriage. And so what's his job? His job, according to the Torah, a man's job in marriage is to make his wife happy. And if he's not making her happy, if she's not happy, he's not doing his job. So then we talk about then I ask them, do you want to know how to make your wife happy? And they're literally on the edge of their chairs. They're like, yeah, just tell me, like, I'll do it. Like, I just don't know. Like, just tell me. So then I break it down for them. It's the 3 A's: attention, affection, and appreciation. I'm not going to go into the whole talk now, but that's what we talk about. We start expounding on that: attention, affection, and appreciation. Because if you ask any woman, if your husband gave you attention, affection, and appreciation, would you be happy? And you know what they say? Yes, I would.
Amazing. And then 2 more questions for you. The first is, in terms of raising Jewish children, you mentioned Jewish jail, and there's this awkward situation of, it's like, well, do I send them to the school? Is the school going to be as good as other kind of education? How do you raise powerfully connected Jewish children?
Okay, so first of all, you can't outsource this. Don't think you're going to send them to any Hebrew school or bar mitzvah lessons or any Jewish day school and think you're going to outsource their love of Judaism. The center of the Jewish community is not the synagogue, it's not the school, it is the home. So what is going on in the home? First of all, what's your job? We talk about what is your job as a parent. Sometimes we forget our job. Sometimes we think we're the referee, the short order cook, the chauffeur. But your job is you're a teacher. You're a teacher of values. So the Hebrew word for education is chinuch, and it's related to the word Hanukkah. So Hanukkah means dedication, and chinuch means education. So what is they share the same shorish, the same Hebrew root, and when we know that when 2 Hebrew words share the same root, there is a deeper message there. So what is the connection between education and dedication, between chinuch and Hanukkah? So Rabbi Moshe Lori of Toronto explained it to us. He said that when you're really educating a child, you're dedicating them with values that are eternal. That's your job. Whether you're doing carpool, or you're chilling with them, or you're disciplining them, or you're hanging out with them, or it's vacation, or it's whatever you're doing, it's an opportunity to do your job. And don't get a whiteboard and put it on in your kitchen, and the kids come down and you say, today's value is honesty, okay, emet, okay, don't do that. The best way to teach anybody anything is to be an example.
What are you the most excited about in the future for JWRP, or like, where do you see this organization going as both, organizationally, and then you personally having this position as a major world figure of Jewish education? Where do you want to push the Jewish world towards?
So we do feel that we've just begun. We are bringing this year about 3,000 participants this year from 26 countries. I do believe very strongly that if we brought 10,000 women a year, that the Jewish people would shift in the right direction. We have the ability to do it. The only thing stopping us is finances. We have the desire from the organizations and the communities. We, thank God, have a very good name out there. I just met with Naftali Bennett, who is the Minister of Education and also the Minister of Diaspora Affairs. And I showed him what's been happening with his investment. They're at 22% of our budget right now. And he said, how many are you bringing? And I said, 3,000 a year. He said, we need to make it 30,000.
You're like, yes.
And I said, I like the way you think. So we are hoping and praying that we somehow can get there in terms of backing, in terms of finances. We believe that what we've done, and in terms of, I want you to appreciate, it's not, we don't offer people a trip. It's a 1-year experience that includes the trip. It's called a year of growth. And because what happens, the last day of the trip is really the first day of their journey. And because we do this in partnership with organizations around the world, whether it's an outreach kollel, or it's a federation, or it's a JCC, or it's a synagogue, or it's a school, if you're a Jewish organization, partner with us and we'll take you from good to great. And so in some cities, we have 7 different organizations partnering with us, organizations that normally never work together and looked at each other as competition. And we're trying to change the mindset of Jewish communal organizations to tell them the other organizations in your community, they're not your competition, they're your partners. They just don't know it yet. And if everybody would just do what they do best, right? Federation, they teach philanthropy the best and leadership. And JCC does Israel engagement the best, at least here locally in DC. And Isha Torah does Torah learning the best. If everybody does what they do best, one of our founding values is if we work together, we can do so much more. And another one of our values is to focus on what unites us and not what divides us. So I do believe that we are poised, and we have developed and almost perfected a methodology and a sense of unity and partnership. We now have Israeli women on every bus as well. We're creating this international sisterhood, and we're ready to scale. And people think like we brought so many, we've just begun. And the Jewish people, we don't have time to wait, and the world doesn't have time to wait. Everybody knows that things are accelerating and not in a positive way in terms of what's happening in the world. And the Jewish people, if the world is going down, the Torah idea is that it's our fault because we're like the oldest child. God loves all the nations, just like I love all my kids. But if you're the eldest in the family, you have a special relationship with your parents because you were the first, you changed their life forever. But it comes with responsibility, and you're supposed to be an example to others. And the Jewish people need to get to be where they need to be. And we just feel the fastest and most strategic way to do it is to target the mother. Because if you inspire a woman, you inspire a family. And if you can inspire enough families, you can inspire a community. And if you can inspire enough communities, you can change the world.
Beautiful. And how do people find more about you, connect with you, or the organization?
So you can go to find out about the JWRP, go to jwrp.org. You can remember it as Jewish Women Are Pretty, or Jewish Women's Renaissance Project, jwrp.org. There's lots of videos, there's lots of things there. If you want to get in touch with me personally, you simply email me, Lori, Lori, @jwrp.org.
There you have it, folks, another inspiring episode. If you enjoyed this, I ask you to please share this with your friends and to like us over on Rabbi Rupp through Facebook or on YouTube. And the more that we're able to get these important messages out, the more that we can really make an impact in the world. So I encourage you, please, to stay tuned. We have a ton of amazing speakers coming up, and also to tell your friends about it. Thank you very much.